All right, welcome back to Disquiet Time. Ann and Kelly here, and we have a really creepy topic for this month. I wanted to get to it in October, but I'm afraid everyone has just been ridiculously swamped for the past few months. So we're getting this one up a little bit late. It's very appropriate for Halloween, but it's a good one. I'm going to let you introduce it since you did the research, Ann.
Okay. It's one of my favorite monsters. The name is Skinwalkers. There is some controversy whether or not you use the name Skinwalker. I know there is a podcast that they have a different name for them. It's really hard to call them anything but that. I think the big thing that we need to distinguish here is that we're not talking about the real ones. We're not talking about the real Skinwalkers. We're not talking about the Yinallushi. And I'm probably mangling that. I did try to look it up with pronunciation guides. That is the actual Navajo name for them. We are not talking about those.
Okay.
We are
absolutely not talking about... call them like skin changers or something like that. That's close enough.
Maybe. But just to be absolutely clear that this is not what we were discussing today.
One that is forbidden, that is offensive to talk about. We are not talking about it.
Yeah, the Yinallushi are actually evil witches, and they use like animal hides to disguise themselves and do evil.
Okay. And that's who we're not talking about.
We're not discussing those, though. The history with those and how people have started using the name is that, it's a concept that's been around for a long time. The idea of using animal hides to gain power is, something that we even see back in European. Yeah, it's all over. European, you're probably more familiar than with like the berserkers and the werewolves. The berserkers weren't really witches, but they did derive some of their power from the animal hides, especially bears, in order to be more ferocious in battle. Werewolf mythology. There's, of course, we all know there's lots of different werewolves in werewolf mythology. Some of them, are cursed to change into the animal. But one of the different werewolves is that it is a witch using like a belt or a girdle made of a wolf pelt to transform into the wolf. So,
that is a common one.
So the whole concept of somebody with malicious intent or anger or whatever using an animal hide to transform into the animal to gain its powers is almost universal as far as I can tell.
Actually, you find it in Asian stories, you find it in African stories. I mean, those are very broad, but I'm saying in different cultures within those continents. It's very, very common, and it has entered popular culture. So I feel like we can discuss this without actually touching on being offensive to the ones.
Right. Again, we have no intent of using that. The Navajo version, these creatures are always evil. They are always extremely dangerous. Even speaking about them can bring you to their attention. You don't want to mess with a real Skinwalker.
No.
There's not a whole lot known if you are not from the area, if you are not sort of part of that inner circle. We don't know a whole lot about it outside of the Navajo culture. It's something that they just don't talk about with outsiders. So we just need to skip forward, and we are talking about pop culture Skinwalker.
How it's entered American culture, filtered through these other avenues.
Exactly. And so we mean absolutely no disrespect to the Navajo culture, the people that have experienced the evil of a real Yinallushi. Everything we're going to talk about from here on out is purely pop culture. The name was simply borrowed. And how people came across, and I'm sure people just loved the name because the name itself evokes...
Oh, it's just creepy.
Horrible feeling, the Skinwalker. And now you're also going to find a wide range of what people are even calling those. You have things all the way from the Jane Yellow Rock books, which are urban fantasy series where the main protagonist is a quote-unquote skinwalker. Basically, she is a shapeshifter.
Oh, okay.
She does have Native American roots, and I guess that is how it is tied into it. But, basically it gets coded as a shapeshifter in most pop culture stuff.
Cool.
I would assume that most people probably came across Skinwalkers kind of the way I did. It sort of became a phenomenon the last few years. And I'm sure that most people came across it on the internet like I did, specifically like Reddit's r/no sleep and the No Sleep podcast, where they read some of those stories were posted on the No Sleep thread subreddit. That's where a lot of Skinwalker stories come from. Most recent exposure, though, if you're just now finding out about them, the odds are good that you may have found them on TikTok. And there's a lot of accounts that are tied to Native Americans where they're not saying the name, but they are alluding to the presence of these monsters.
Oh, see, and I haven't run into that on TikTok at all.
Yeah, most of them is that there's a non-native person who's like, oh, look, there's a weird deer outside, or look at these strange coyotes, and the
they're like, get away from
the Native American person is like, lock the door, close the curtains, we don't leave till sunup, basically.
Right.
So, that's where a lot of people, I think, now are starting to get exposed to them, where they may not have known about them before either. So they're getting bigger and bigger, but these are that being tied to it is perhaps more of an allusion to the actual ones, but it's still kind of the same thing that people are talking about, coyotes and deer and things like that.
Well, and it's not inaccessible, even if it's new to people, because of our own culture's background with the idea of berserkers, etc., like we've already talked about. And even if you come from a different culture, a more African culture or an Asian culture, you're going to have some background with this.
Right, you're still going to understand the concept of some kind of magic user using the skin of an animal.
Right, and for good or evil.
Right, and skinwalkers, even in pop culture, or as far as I can tell, other than, say, Jane Yellow Rock, almost universally evil.
Yeah. But Scandinavian berserkers, they're not evil, they're just terrifying.
Right, but the berserkers are warriors and they kill people. They are not doing good and friendly things when wearing these.
Oh, they're not doing friendly things, but
they
for
are
their own
killing. Now, are they doing it to protect their own people? Possibly. Neither here nor there, but definitely in general, any of the myth is going to be evil unless somebody has gone out of their way to not. And I do find it interesting with that particular series of books that they have made her into the good guy. But I think they have taken some pretty big liberties with the type.
Yes.
The very common characteristics, if we want to talk about those. The most common that people are familiar with Skinwalker is that bipedal deer.
Mm-hmm.
If you just Google Skinwalker, the picture that comes up is going to be a rotting deer monster. It's the most common. I have absolutely no idea who the original creator is. I wish I did. So I try not to use it on stuff just because I don't know who actually made it and I can't give them credit.
Right.
But it has basically become the internet's version of what you imagine when you think of it. And most stories with these, even supposed, quote unquote real stories, which, No Sleep is not real, but then there's also, these scary things happen to me threads, of course, on Reddit. And the most common is that it starts out with that people are alone or in a small group in a remote area. They're hiking, they're camping, they're in a cabin. The horror staple.
They're drunk peeing on the side of the road.
Right. We will get to that later. It's pretty much, ever since people settled into villages and towns, we feared what's outside our walls, I mean, do you have something, anthropological you can share with us here on this? That basically outside our walls have become the scary unknown, the wilderness.
Night has always been scary within human culture. We have some of the earliest stuff that we see that appears to be ritualistic, appears to be sympathetic magic, either for things that are very uncertain, like hunting, or to do with burials, but also to do with the things we don't know what they are at night.
Right. It's ingrained. I don't know if there's a human alive who has a normal fear response in them. Granted, there are people who do not have a bit of, I don't want to look out that dark window at night.
I don't want to see what's out there.
I don't want to walk walking to the barn in the dark and hearing the coyotes.
Right. It can be terrifying, but a coyote is not so scary.
Right, but it tickles the back of your mind, and you get that very visceral reaction to things in the dark, things outside our homes, things outside of our towns, all of that. And so these play into it.
Outside of the tent, whatever you're in. I think it's just a very old part of the human psyche when there were dangerous things out there before.
Right. And like if you're going hiking or camping or whatever, most of the time you're on a curated trail, you're at a campsite. But even if you're, say, hiking in your cousin's 100 acres or whatever, it's still their property, but there's still the part of you that says, but what if it is
contained? Yeah.
What is it? It doesn't have a road going through it, right? So it almost always, that's how most of these stories start. You are in some way out of your normal elements.
Right. You're not in the middle of a city. You're not.
Now, sometimes you are in your house or your cabin and you hear these things.
But it's inside the walls.
Right. And if it gets inside the walls, then the story really turns south. But
yeah,
it is nearly universally starts outside.
Mm-hmm.
Out of our house. So the stories are, the person gets separated or they're somehow isolated or alone and they start to hear noises. They always turn and look and it's just a deer or a coyote and things, but is it? And they look closer and they notice the deer is not walking on four legs, but it's standing on its back legs.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't do that. And then they'll notice that they smell.
A deer do that sometimes.
Right, but these are almost always city people.
Right.
And they notice that there's a strong smell of dead animal or something rotten at the same times. And if they run, the thing always pursues them and it always moves faster than you expect a deer to move, right? Or it moves in ways that it shouldn't.
Right. Which is totally city person because you're never outrunning a deer. And a deer in rut stinks. And yes, they will go up on their hind legs.
Right. And that a lot of this too is that, people are going to be seeing deer when the fuzz comes off the antlers and it bleeds.
There's I was going to say that earlier. Your rotting deer was probably.
Right. It was really just the velvet there, sorry, the word left me, the velvet hanging off of it. But these things have sort of fed into these stories, right? The deer was probably standing up reaching for a branch or
they'll go up on their hind legs to intimidate if they're frightened.
Right, or it was, had been in a fight or was looking for a fight or, deer aren't sweet. I'm sorry, deer are not sweet.
Bambi told us all wrong. Deer are not sweet.
They only look sweet.
Well, they're cute, but...
Yeah, so anyway, the people will always try to run from these things and they'll all, most of the time they think they've lost it. They think they think they've escaped it or they start hearing voices in the woods. Oh, they're not alone after all. Maybe, it sounds like the voices of the people they've been with or people they know or wait, it's their own voice. And the words coming out of the woods sound weird, right? They sound garbled. They sound like it's been run through a voice-altering thing.
All this idea of voices and altered voices or hearing your own voice in the woods isn't just tied to these skinwalkers, skin changers. That's actually a very common theme as well.
Yes, there are plenty of other things, but this theme shows up. These things show up very much with these stories. And a lot of times, they might say it sounds strange or halting or it's stumbling under the unfamiliar sounds, like a deer trying to learn how to speak like a human, but as it practices, it gets better. And as it gets closer, it sounds more human. And, the voice starts to even out and then it sounds like them and they're echoing back the things you've said while you were in the woods, right? I even played with this, in a story that I wrote for The Night is Dark, and it's about a guy out in a house that's very remote, and he starts hearing something outside repeating the words he had said earlier.
This is one of our very first posts, actually, was that story.
Yes, that story about the guy who was doing a curation for a museum.
Mm-hmm. The woods, yep, hits all of those points.
And that was kind of the intent of it, was to kind of hit on a lot of these common stories with these creatures. But those are the features that you usually see: the deer or the coyote. It's acting strangely. It smells like it's already dead. The voices, the speaking, the following you better than an animal should be able to, which I've never understood that, because I'm sorry, the deer lives there. It can
It's going to do way better in the woods than you at night.
There is a story that I have. It is from a friend of mine. It's an actual experience from a friend of mine that I'm not going to identify or even what part of the country it was in. This was something that happened to her. I didn't see it. She told me about it afterwards, and it scared the hell out of me. It is not anywhere near that you would normally, though, expect this to happen. She was driving with one of her children late at night. She lives near a forest. She lives near a national forest, and so there are no streetlights. And they were driving quite late at night. And as they were coming around sort of a windy part of the road, something darted across the road in front of them. No big deal. There's things as big as bears out there. A deer, a dog, a cat, a fox. They have all sorts of stuff out there. But that's not what it looked like. She said that it looked to be well over 6 feet, probably closer to 7 feet tall. It definitely had something that looked like a rack of antlers, and it was absolutely standing upright on its back legs. And it moved very quickly across the road. It was not afraid of them. It did not stop and stare like a deer would. It simply zipped across the road. Of course, her first thought is, I am losing my mind.
Yeah, that would be my first thought.
And she turns to her child, who was a teenager at the time, in the car, and he's like, yep, I saw it too. As she's telling me this, we are driving down the exact same road at night, and we get to her house a couple minutes later and get out, and she's like, oh, hey, I need something out of the car. You need to go out and get it. And I was like, you think I'm going outside in the dark?
Right. Hello.
And I was that. Yes, I took her small lap dogs with me because I figured they'd at least alert me, right?
Yeah, they'd be loud.
Nothing came and got me, but it was very bizarre that particular, and she knew nothing about these. She is not a fan of horror. She is not a fan of scary things. She had nothing that would have triggered her to have seen this and then put something on top of it. It's not like she just saw a deer zip across the road and added this stuff intentionally, because even subconsciously, because she did not have anything to frame that.
Right.
So you can see have these encounters, and you can see where people are getting these.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Now you had one also. You knew a story. Somebody you knew.
Yeah, somebody I knew. I wasn't involved in this, but a group of people that I knew had gone to a local, kind of off in the woods area, but I mean it was a town. But they were on their way back, and you have to pass through the woods, and unfortunately, quite a few of them had been drinking, though the driver had not, according to the story. And so they had to stop at the side of the road in the woods to take care of business. And as they were doing that, including the driver, who was supposed to be sober, multiple people in that vehicle reported seeing out in the pasture, like there had been the tree line where they stopped to pee, but out in the pasture, they thought it was a horse. But I mean, in the dark, it could have been a deer. On its hind legs with glowing red eyes running towards the car.
Yeah, in the story,
they cough, of course.
Like, oh, well, they were drinking, but how many of these stories do involve things like, well, there might have been a few beers, but we weren't drunk.
Right.
Okay, are you sure?
But, I mean, the thing is none of these people involved in this, at least the ones who saw it, to my knowledge, none of them have any background or knowledge of any of these things either.
Right. They never have the claim to see anything else supernatural. None of them have showed anything of the sort.
Right. So, and it was about half and half. About half the people in the car saw nothing. About half did. So, but these aren't a group of people who go ghost hunting or any of that.
Right. They didn't spook themselves into it by going out there thinking they were going to see something.
Telling scary stories and then getting out of the car in the dark. And, of course you see something scary. So I mean, it makes you go,
Yeah, it is weird, and it turns out that a friend of ours was living out that way.
Very close to there at the time.
Very close to there, yeah, and she did say that the woods were a little creepy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there were times that it was a little creepy out there, so.
Mm-hmm.
Never heard anybody else mention a demon horse out there. I've always kept my ears open.
Oh, I do too. Anytime anyone says anything, I'm like, oh, where was that? Oh, no, okay.
Yeah, never mind. It was nowhere near there. So keep hoping to see if maybe there's another encounter with a demon horse out there, or a deer, or whatever it was.
Or whatever.
It was a deer. I mean, we've also had several issues with deer in this area. With like the wasting disease and stuff like that, where they start to act a little weird. So it even could have been a very sick deer coming towards them.
It could have. I mean, there are logical explanations, but there's also, well, that's pretty darn freaky.
Right. There are parts of it that's like, well, I mean.
Yeah, it's very interesting because this is something that you see all across the world. This idea of animals acting or mimicking in human ways, but for evil reasons, not good.
Right, they're almost always in some way a familiar or possessed or controlled by something else.
Or fae or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything that sounds human but looks like an animal, probably fae, don't mess with it.
I mean, that is just sort of a good life rule. If it is acting weird, it is either sick, possessed, or a fae animal. And there's just no reason for you to mess with it and just go ahead and move on.
Yep, exactly. And don't poke anything with a stick.
Oh, yeah. Well, we learned that from the Blob.
Yep.
Don't poke things with sticks. That's a terrible idea.
Those are my two main life rules.
Yeah, don't poke things with sticks.
Yep. And don't mess with anything that is an animal-human hybrid. It's not going to go well.
Right. No matter what is actually wrong with it, it is not going in your favor.
Nope. So leave it alone. Don't chase it. Don't find out more.
Definitely. I did want to close with one thing, though, is that these are often sometimes mixed up with Wendigo.
Mm-hmm.
I have been guilty of kind of combining the Skinwalker and the Wendigo in stories. Wendigo are actually from the Northwest, and they are actually monsters created when people have resorted to cannibalism.
Okay, I was saying what I know is Arctic. But it's a cannibal spirit. It's not an animal form.
Right. It is also in the Northwest area.
I believe it comes down from the Arctic all the way through there with those long, wet winters.
Yes, it definitely goes all the way down into like Washington and Oregon. There are some hints of the Wendigo story. I have heard it also pronounced Wendigo, but everything I looked up said that based on the history of the name, that it is pronounced Wendigo.
Wendigo. Okay, I've also heard Wendigo. So.
Yeah, I've also heard Wendigo. Either of those are a lot closer than Wendigo. It's not Spanish.
Right. No, and that one's very interesting. At least up in the Arctic, it's thought it's actually less supernatural and more like a stress response to those long frozen winters where you're trapped inside for weeks and months at a time.
Right.
And there's not really any cannibalism associated with it. It's more that you become almost fixated on, oh my gosh, what if I am a cannibal?
Right.
You have to isolate from everybody else. You got to get out of that situation.
Right, but then also there's the act of cannibalism, even in a very desperate situation, even to save yourself or others, will attract the Wendigo spirit and cause you to go mad.
Right. So it is definitely different.
It is, but you will see them sort of combined. You will see kind of combinations of the traits. Like I said, I'm even guilty of it. A story I haven't published yet. Where the creature has some traits of both.
Okay.
It has definitely got some cannibal elements, but it also has some more skinwalker elements.
Okay. Yeah.
So you do sometimes see them combined, but they are absolutely not from the same traditions.
No, not at all.
And they come from the same place, the fear of being alone, the isolation, things like that. But they are not the same creatures.
No. Even if they tend to get linked. Wendigo is more what we consider a culture-bound syndrome, meaning it's isolated to just a very few groups of people. Then it's very specific, and it's usually based on something.
Who actually experience very specific set of circumstances regularly.
Right, for those types of things to kind of pop up. And Skinwalker doesn't fall into that category at all.
No.
That's way more universal.
At least the very basis of it, the root of it is universal, even if the details are...
Right, the details.
The details are kept very close to the chest to that actual culture, but the basics are essentially universal.
Right. Yeah, we don't know any of the details for the other one. But
there's certainly details that we don't know that I'm sure separate it completely.
Probably. I'm not even going to speculate. I don't want to offend anybody, but
right. But what we know certainly has the same basis as a lot of other myths. So, yeah. But hey, if something's talking to you outside and it sounds really weird and it looks like a deer, I mean,
bolt.
Close your windows if I were you.
Yeah.
The morbid, as you know, fresh air is for dead people.
Yes.
So,
here's for dead people.
Just saying, if anything out your windows starts talking at you and it's not a person, close the windows.
Yep. So there you go. Happy holidays, happy New Year, and keep your windows closed.
And probably don't go out in the woods for New Year's.
Yeah, probably not.
I would say that's a bad idea. Just saying.
Unless the woods you know well and are safe in.
Oh, but that's always part of the story. They're just out hiking.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, Teresa.
I did do a New Year's hike with her once.
Yes.
And it was during the day.
Not a single monster.
Nope, no monsters.
That's excellent.
Okay, this is kind of a short one, but it'll help us kind of get back on track. So why don't we wrap up here?
Yep, that'll be it.
All right, so this is going to close out 2022 for us, and we'll come back in 2023 with something else creepy, hopefully. All right, have some good holidays. Bye.
Happy New Year.
Yes.
Bye.